So I'll turn my page horizontally, right, because it's a landscape composition and it makes sense to do that. So it helps to have this kind of on hand. So maybe I'll take this off because I'm going to go with this little composition here. So maybe I'll take this out and put it on the side so I can refer to it. The sketches help. And now I'll start to sketch. Can you guys see that? Is the whole drawing there? Yeah, okay. So now I'll start to sketch out my composition, right? But I need to start with those boundaries, right? Because I need to establish, for instance, my proportion and do something like that. I have this nice long, like widescreen landscape. And you can see, like you guys, I also need sometimes a couple lines to get myself a straight edge, but I really pay attention to my corners side to side. My corners help me see this as a box. You know, corners are really important directional clues, even within your drawing. So putting a little bit of emphasis on the corners ain't never hurt nobody. And you know, I have just like a little few compositional notes that I can take from my sketch, which would be helpful, I think. So I'll just etch those in a little bit, like a head and a torso over here with some arms and a hand and a hand and a bench like this, and make sure I pay attention to the relationship between, like, for instance, the stool that Jack's sitting on and his butt and the bench itself. And then the chair behind Jack, looking something like that. And right, something like this. Okay, and let's get that up just a little higher. The line that runs through the back of Jack's head, the window line, like that. And then the ceiling line, that's too steep of an angle, something like this. And then that goes just above Jack's head, coming like that. Right, and I have to, I need that line to be pretty clear because I need to know if I need ceiling there or not. Do I want this to run off and be cropped, or do I want it to stay on the picture and not be cropped? That answer I don't know yet, but I need that bit of information there. All right, so that's a little bit of ceiling there. The windows come here, about, and then there, something like that. So we start to get a sense of the room. And attentive students sitting at different levels from each other and different levels from Jack for sure. And then another student much, much closer, but not as close as Jack. Right, something like that. Now, you notice on my sketch that the composition worked out a little differently. Here I had a big crop of that student, right? So the silhouette of that student is here, right at the edge. And I do have to ask myself, like, well, is that what I want? Do I want to end this composition sort of here and crop that student off? Or do I want space behind that student? And, if I do that, I can have another student. Never enough students, always more, never less. Right, and actually I see, like, even there's another student that is over here, somewhere, but maybe I can move them over in my mind and put them back here. So I get a little bit more of a crowd. So, okay, I'll do something like that. I'll leave it a little bit longer and make use of that space, I think, but I can always crop that off later if I don't like it. And there's some stuff here up against the wall that might be useful for some perspective space, and a little pole here as well, something like that. Another line here. Divide up that window. Okay, so with a situation like this, now we have enough to kind of get started, right? So what I might now, a lot of these lines aren't very important to me and they're just placeholders. So I might go in and I might take my gesture drawing here, which is just like kind of this rhythm into the back of the head and the front of the face and the neck and the shoulder and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of quick gesture drawing, I might take that and use that, and I might take, like, for instance, a measurement of Jack's head. And it's just a nice convenient, head sizes are always convenient. And I can't see his whole head, so I'm just basically gonna go like his, it's not really how my drawing is here. His face kind of hides behind his shoulder there like that. So I'm gonna basically take from the top of Jack's head, which is like this point here, to that point of intersection there. And I'll just grab that measurement. And I'm not using that measurement to bring directly down to my board, but I'm gonna create just a proportional relationship. So I'm gonna double that and see that when I double that measurement, it comes almost exactly to, from here to there. If I double it again, it comes almost exactly to where Jack's elbow hits the chair. Not perfectly, but close enough to where I can say, okay, it's just above or just below that. Well, damn, that's really different than what I had sketched in, isn't it? That's like a whole lot of difference. Right? So that's a really good clue that I have already. Just from a quick measurement, that's gonna really help me sort out what the hell I'm doing here. And then when I do another one, I drop another one right there, and I drop another one, I get to like the top of his knee, right? So you can see like my guess was really off. Even though I'm a pretty good guesser, I can see that the knee wants to be here, like that. And that we're gonna go from there, right? So that gives us some really good clues. Now we could take some more clues, and let's get the arm going there. We can take some more clues, and let's say I take, like, for instance, the width of Jack's head from the farthest point back to the farthest point forward, which is the back of his head right about there to the front of his mask. And I take that and I just compare that to the overall height. And I see that it's just like right about there, and I just want to check that on my drawing pad and see if that makes sense. And it just about does. So I'm going to go ahead and refine this a little bit and make sure that my shape makes sense. So I have a pretty good height and width. And now I'm going to make a generalized shape, but not too general, right? Something a little bit more like that. And I don't need too much information in there. For a face, normally I value the position of the ear. So I might put the position of the ear in there. And from there, I'm going to start to draw a little bit and get that shoulder in. And I know that shoulder wants to be there, and that arm wants to be here, and wants to go out to the chair, right? And already I feel like just those few quick measurements got me so much closer to the gesture that Jack actually has, that kind of really nice bent over gesture. Jack has this great way of modeling that can be very relaxed, you know, and like there's always a good amount of weight in Jack. It looks, for me, it's quite good posture. So now I can run like maybe a rhythm off the back of Jack's head and just say, well, you know, where does his back hit that, right? If I just run an arc like that, where does his back hit? And I'll say somewhere around there. And then if I run that same arc like through, for instance, Jack's head and chest, maybe it's something like that. And then, you know, I have a sense of where the top of his knee is. I have a sense of where this line is. I have a sense of where this arc goes. So I'm getting a lot closer to being able to figure out where this shirt line goes, something like that. right? And I think now I'm a lot closer to where I want to be, and you can see that I don't have enough of this, the butt, and I don't have a really good sense of how it is that the chair meets that. So that all helps a lot, I think, right? And we're still not really drawing yet, right? We're just sort of diagramming. So I can see the hand sort of hanging out in there and this nice foreshortened forearm, and I can see this other hand out here, right? So now I've got that in pretty well, right? Good enough just to, you know, again, I'm not really drawing, I'm just kind of placeholding, but good enough that it has a pretty good placeholder, and I can start to figure out the rest of my composition as well. So I might take, for instance, the width of this chair, right? Because I want to make sure to get that right, or things are going to get messed up. So I'm going to take the width of that chair, and I'm going to compare it to something like maybe the length of Jack's leg. And the width of the chair to me seems about this same distance. So if I'm going to call that like kind of true-ish, I'm going to see that my chair needs to be a lot wider. So I can go ahead and make that happen. And this will help me a lot, because if I have that measurement all off, then I'm just never going to have too much success really figuring out the rest of the composition. And notice I'm not drawing too darkly. Anything that seems dark right now is Vine charcoal and will come right off. There's just a couple of little notations I've made with the Conte just to kind of straighten things out, but everything's really erasable right now, really fuzzyable. So I can come in also and I can make, you know, the width of this chair will really help me establish the width of this bench. And without that, you know, drawing the perspective of such a complicated curved object, you know, could really be very tricky. So I'm happy to have something that'll help guide me with that instead of just trying to like freehand this or free guess at it. So get a little bit of the bench in there like that, and then maybe a little bit of the arm in here, something like that. Again, we're still just sketching, not really drawing too much. Just trying to find the composition. So confine can come now. Make sure to get this little bench in here, and confine the bottom of the window there, bottom of the window here. And let's see what else we have. We have another window here, and like a nice little, let's see, a nice little indication of the heater right here. So that's a nice little layering, right? And even though it's not such a crucial thing, what it's gonna do is it's gonna give me a really nice like 1, 2, 3. It's gonna give me a really nice like leg, heater, bench. Like 1, 2, 3, back in space. So I value that, right? I want that there. And then I can add in this little statue back here, which will be a nice fun little wacky shape, and maybe crop it a little bit, and it'll just be kind of a weird shape in the background. And so that gives me a number 4, right? That's like a number 4 back here. So that's a nice little cluster of layering. And then of course the background's behind that, right? So we have the windowsill here and the window there. So now we have like 5 layers, like 5. And then if we go outside the window, we have 6, right? If I draw a little, you know, plant or something like that out there, now we have 6 layers of depth, and that's really a lot of depth. So that's pretty cool. I'm into that. I don't know if I'm going to keep all that, but that's, you know, that's a great way to start to establish that. So here can start to break up these windows again and start to think about these blinds, if I want those blinds in and where they kind of intersect and how dark they are compared to the light outside, and that might be really interesting. Right, and this little last blind back there, and some of the windowsill. And then I might take, like, for instance, one of these students that I see, like I have a little torso here, like a little stool there, and I might say, okay, well, how far is that from the chair, right? So I get that head, and I get the chair, and I compare it, and it's not quite the same width, so it's something like that, and that puts me in pretty good position. Like maybe it's a little closer. I don't know if I'd even bother to reorganize that really. But, you know, if it, like what'll happen is if you get that off, but then you, for instance, gauge the upright for the window based on its relationship to the head, then it's going to be really, really different than its relationship to the chair if you don't get that right. So it's worth kind of correcting these things, even if they seem a bit insignificant. And then I'm going to take the overall size of this because I want to make sure the size is right. So I get the torso and the head, and I'll just compare it to Jack's head, and it's the same size. So this whole thing should be that big, and it is. That was my guess, so that worked out okay. So, you know, I can just quickly sketch in, get a haircut and, you know, a mask and some shoulders and let's see, something like that. Use some nice straight lines and an arm, and then there's a stool here, right? Something like that. Brian, get back in your seat. It's your turn. Just in time. Okay. So I'm going to take that measurement, butt to head, and I'm going to compare that to Jack 2 and just try to find some convenient measurement. And so, I don't know, I find it's about like this, like just to the bottom of the shadow line of the shoulder. So that, again, my guess was pretty good. I think I'll bring that just about down here. And that bears out that this line where the butt hits the stool is just about at the elbow. So all that bears out pretty good according to my guess. And I can continue to measure into that if I want to, but right now I won't because I'm still just, again, I'm not drawing yet. I'm just kind of sketching still. And so I'm dealing with my bigger proportions right now, not my smaller proportions. So later when I get into this, I'll want to come back in and remeasure and stuff and make sure that that head is the right size compared to the body, et cetera, et cetera. So now I have this figure in the foreground, and there's a nice angle here that tells me that head should be a lot taller. And that's good because that wasn't looking like a very impressive size relationship. And I actually like, one of the things that I really like here, speaking of these secondary compositions, is I like that there's kind of a group of students here like this, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so. And I like that those students, even though they're grouped, have this like group within the group, right? So it's like there's these two students over here, and then there's like this group of students over there, and there's some space in between them. So that's the nice like asymmetrical thing. And as an overall group, they're really low compared to, like, for instance, the focal point of Jack's hair. Jack, how are you? Are you okay to stay up there for a little bit? Okay. Let me know if you need to take a rest because you can, okay? So, you know, here I'll just break up like a haircut down and get like a quick mask in there. And you now are forever immortalized. Also, everybody's getting immortalized today. Some glasses. That's too much detail. If you were drawing glasses, I would come around and tell you, why are you drawing glasses? It's not time for that yet. So, because I don't even know if that head is the right size yet, right? So it looks really odd, I think, in my drawing to have such detail, such glasses in there right now. It's almost like as if this whole drawing is just about those glasses or something, which it's not, right? So that's why I say, like, you know, try to be really conscious about what you need. Like, I don't need those in there for this to be a compositional moment. I don't need any of that information. I just need this shape, right? Basically, and I don't even need that. I just need this triangle, right? I can start with that triangle, but since I have a sketch that's a little bit more descriptive, then I'll go with it for now. So there's some haircut and a little bit of a face, and then some other students in the background who are just barely showing up. So I'm not going to get too much into drawing them, and that is that. Okay, so right, some stool, some chair, something like that, ponytail business, and So now you can start to figure out your tones, right? And you can say, well, okay, you know, Jack's up here in the foreground and he's kind of backlit and he's got dark hair. So maybe there's some tonality there. Definitely this hand is like really dark. This hand has some darkness to it, some stripes in his shorts and, you know, some things like that. So, okay, so that's kind of dark. And this stool is really dark. And I don't know if I want it to be dark. I can change that, right? Like I can make that not so dark, but I'm not sure yet. There's a really nice highlight on this bench, which is, I think, really important. There's two. There's one along the curved edge here, and then there's one along this this handle here. So I think those are two really important moments. And then the heater over here is a pretty light shape with some kind of dark stripes in it. And then the front of it's a little bit darker. And then we have that kind of, oh, this goes a little bit higher, doesn't it? This kind of interesting little anatomical study here, which goes something like that. And that's all the way in the background, so I'll probably take some of that darkness out. This chair here is pretty dark, but it also has some highlights on the seat. But this part, pretty dark. Right, I'll just guess in these like rails for right now and know that these two side rails are a bit darker. A little bit something like that, and actually I think there's a little bit even more tone in Jack, because when I look at the whole situation I realize that the brightest thing is like out the window, right? So I might need some tone everywhere else in this drawing, like in these, if I'm gonna get that sense that like it's brighter outside. And there's these nice little strips of light, like when the blinds are revealing for us the outside, like when there's space in between, we then, you know, we get that kind of page white. So maybe all this has to be like a little bit darker, right? This haircut maybe a little bit darker. Oops, make sure not to take the whole face away. Right, something like that, haircut, right? And now we have something that feels like a composition with some value in it. So we might separate, because now this is important, right? Because I'm not trying to like draw this, I'm not trying to draw that, but I am trying to separate this region from this region. So I need a little bit of darkness and a little bit of overlap there. So I'm going to separate that out, and I'm going to create a little bit more darkness up in this corner. Like that, but not so much darkness that Jack's head disappears. So I might fade that out a little bit as it comes to Jack's head, and I might darken up a little bit Jack's haircut there. Right, something like that. And I know that I need this whole ceiling to be darker, but there's also lights in the ceiling, and those lights are pretty cool indicators of perspective and stuff like that. So I think I'm going to make sure to get some of those in, and those have these great little rectilinear shapes like this. And so I can draw those in, but I have to be careful, right? Because these are light shapes. So if I draw them in like this, they become dark shapes, and that's really not what I want them to be at all. So I'm going to sketch them in like this, and then I'm going to make sure to get them. Let me just get them in a place that makes sense with each other here. I'm going to make sure to get them right away lighter than the rest of the background. And this is, you know, I think a really fun part, which is like managing your values so that you can do things like this. So if I get all of this a little bit darker to where, and notice like I just, you know, kind of fuzzed out my drawing a little bit. Okay, I can come in and I can erase out those shapes so that they look like lights. Right here, oops, I did the wrong one. Not that one. Wait, is it that one? Oh no, it is that one. Whoops. Hey, confusing. Right, something like that. Something like that. Something like that. something like that, and back here as well, right? So now I have some lights. They're not super bright, which I think is important because I actually don't want this drawing to be about those lights necessarily. But also I have a lot of value structure to go because I haven't gotten very dark at all. I haven't even gotten close to that. So with Jack as the focal point, I might have some really interesting triangles. I might have this like interesting triangle between this chair, head and head, or head and lights and head, or this cluster, that cluster, and this cluster, this big triangle here. So just thinking about triangles as much as possible. And now I can come in and I can draw with some value and compositional intelligence, right? So as I etch in Jack's haircut shape like this, I know that I want it to be pretty dark, right? So I can get in all of these shapes and all of this shape and work out that dark shape pretty nicely. And by going that dark, all of a sudden it makes a lot of other things not that dark anymore. It makes this kind of stuff really, really gray suddenly. And that's good because that means that we have some ability to maneuver there, right? We can adjust some of our drawing and our value there. All right, so there's the mask, under the chin, separation of the mask, all that kind of stuff. And you can come in and you can be slick even at this point and be like, I want to get that little wire in there and it'll look so good. Okay, that's fun, right? What time is it, by the way? Can someone tell me?
12:07.
Okay, gotta hurry up. All right, so here, right, get some of these creases in, get some of these intersections and overlaps, get some of these creases in, right? Just starting to sketch and draw a little bit. Here, here. Get a nice little core shadow in. There and there. And get some of these wrinkles in. All right, something like that. Arm in. Right, something like that. And maybe I'll pull out just a little bit of the front side of that mask as well. Jack's forehead, something like that. So coming over here, if I have this sense, like I still haven't gone full dark here, so I can still draw into Jack's haircut here. And, you know, like some of those mountains, I still have a lot of black to go. So I can use that to define different planes and different hair patterns and stuff like that there. So that's good because I haven't gone all the way black, so I can still put detail in there if I want it. Coming over here to this haircut, I know that I probably don't want to go as dark as I did with Jack's haircut because that's not my primary focus. So I'll come over here and I'll etch in some of this haircut and make sure I get a good head shape around here, and get a little darker there, but not as dark as Jack, because Jack is the star of the show. And get that mask in. Something like that. And get a little bit more of the darkness in here. Always important to let the dark in. Let's see, so, right, still don't really need those glasses yet. Right, they just come, I don't know, maybe just a little indication of them. And a nice forehead, right, because that's important for the proportion. And, right, a little bit of black like that, right? So that creates a nice, now you have a clear relationship, right? There's two characters in this story for sure, this one and that one, right? And everything else is background. So put a little neck in there, right? A little bit here, here. And maybe just pull out that shoulder a little bit, right? So a little bit of drawing, not much, just enough to get us understanding what we're looking at, right? And then we have some characters in the background here, right? And so a little bit there, everybody wearing a mask, a little bit here. Everybody wearing a mask. Right, so notice that I stepped down that contrast, right? I didn't make these go as dark as that, and I also didn't make them go as light as that, right? They still have a little bit of gray in the highlights, and they still have a little bit of gray in the blacks, right? But doing all that allows me, honestly, to get a little bit darker back here, right? So I can go back in and I can darken all this stuff up. And that's where I feel it gets really fun, because you can come back in and you can erase out, right? And so now I might be able to get these to like really actually look like lights. And I'll for sure have to come in and clean up those edges. And here, my other light. Right, something like that. And coming back here and finding that separation. And clean up these shapes and edges, make sure that they relate to each other so that they seem like they're in perspective space to each other. Right? So something like that. And get these shades coming down. A little bit darker there. And a little bit darker here, right? And you really have a lot of room to maneuver when you haven't gone so dark so fast, right? And you can see that we're starting to get a really nice sense of the outside, right? That the outside is nice and bright compared to the inside, right? And that's where this kind of grayed out tool really becomes really so nice. Right. So those of you who are interested in like, animation or storyboarding or film, like this is where drawing really becomes relevant to you, which is like thinking about it like this. And even if you don't, for instance, spend the rest of your time perfecting your craft of how to lay in values, you need to be thinking in this way. If you're a cinematographer, if you're laying out compositions or whatever, if you're designing or something like that, you need to be thinking in this way, right? Because if you're not, then you're just missing out on a bunch of the things that people generally pick up on that matter to people. So this is the part, this kind of design conversation is the part that I feel like really transcends like drawing as a discipline and really gets you into a conversation where regardless of what discipline you go into, what path you take here at ADM or in your career, it really makes it relevant to you throughout your studies. That's why I'm always so happy to teach drawing. I like drawing for that reason. Okay, so chair and then some arms, right? Something like that. And if I want to pull this into focus, I can just increase the contrast there and pull out a highlight, right? And if I want to get in some of that detail, if I want, I can start to work into that, draw the little design here. Right, something like that, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, before Jack dies of modeling too long, let's let him go ahead and come down, Jack. You're good, Jack? You're good. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jack. Appreciate that long pose. So that's it. And this would be like a good spot to start drawing, right? So I have everything laid out. I have all my big shapes laid out. So this is like, when you talk about how to go from like, what's the difference between like a 5-minute drawing, a 10-minute drawing, a 15-minute drawing, a 20-minute drawing, a 30-minute drawing, a 2-hour drawing, a 6-hour drawing, a 12-hour drawing, a 40-hour drawing, a 200-hour drawing, right? Like what's the difference between all those things and how do you build on top of them? I don't know if you've ever had the experience of like making a 5-minute drawing, feeling like, hey, that's pretty good. And by the time you get to 15 minutes, feeling like, oh, hey, I just ruined that. Right? And so that feeling sometimes is because you don't necessarily know how to put the blocks in place to build on and take advantage of that extra time. So what I have now is just a compositional design and like a little bit of a value layout. So this would be a great one just to take my hand and just kind of blur it out a little bit, take away some of the drawing and some of the value and go back into it, right? And lose some of the bits that I have and go back into it with my tool and say, okay, well, what do I want? Do I want to highlight here? Do I want to bring her into focus like that? I can make her the most important character in this whole thing, right? I can subdue Jack, right? And make him like a totally secondary character and make this character the star of the show, right? And if I just go a little darker here like that, right? I can invert my contrast. Right? I can totally shift the focus over here, right? And everything's still there. Jack is still there. I can even put the highlights back in, but because the contrast range isn't so great, this will be about this character and not about that character. So see the way the focus just shifts entirely? So if I start putting more and more detail or more detail, or if I start getting darker here, I can even out that focus. Or honestly, I can blur both of them out and start putting the contrast back here, and it'll be about these guys in the background. And if I put enough detail in there, then, it's just like these just happen to be big foreground. I mean, I could silhouette them entirely and create a situation that looks like this, right? Like here's Jack. Here's this foreground character, right? Something like that. And then if I reduce the contrast in those areas and make it about these guys here, right? Then the whole thing becomes about them. I just have to reduce the contrast in those areas and create that kind of silhouette, and I can change the focus of that composition as well, right? So it becomes very cinematic in that way. Like, what are you focusing on? What are you bringing our attention to, right? And call that a day. So, okay, I'm gonna stop recording.